Luna Pierce had buried her father that morning, alone in the unforgiving Colorado wilderness, when 12 timber wolves emerged from the pines like shadows given teeth. She had nothing but a broken rifle in fading daylight when silent elk descended. The cliff faced like death itself, carrying weapons that sang in the mountain air and secrets that would unravel everything she thought she knew about survival. Vengeance, and the thin line between hunter and hunted.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
The shovel felt heavier with each scoop of frozen earth Luna threw over her father's pine coffin. Thomas Pierce had been a good man, a fair trader, and the only family she had left in a territory that showed no mercy to the alone or unprepared. The cabin they'd shared for 3 years sat 40 yards away, smoke still rising from the chimney, but it might as well have been 40 miles for all the comfort it offered now. She'd wrapped him in his best wool coat, the one he'd worn to town on Sundays, and placed his silver pocket watch on his chest before lowering the rough-hewn box into the shallow grave. The ground was too hard for anything deeper, and her back was too tired from 3 days of his fever and delirium to dig clean. But she'd done it because no one else was coming, not from Granite Falls, 20 miles south through treacherous mountain passes that claimed more lives than bandits ever did. Not from the Modoc reservation, where tensions ran high and white settlers were about as welcome as rattlesnakes in a church service. Not even from the scattered homesteads dotting the valley below, where neighbors kept to themselves and minded their own survival. The wind picked up as she patted down the last of the dirt, carrying with it the sharp scent of pine and something wild that made the hair on her neck stand straight. Luna straightened, wiping her palms on her leather apron, and that's when she heard it. Not a howl, not yet, but something deeper. The sound of breathing that didn't belong to any creature that feared humans. She turned toward the tree line. 50 yards from the cabin, and her blood turned to ice water in her veins. Eyes, yellow, unblinking, and far too intelligent for comfort. Not one pair, not 3, but enough to form a loose semicircle around the clearing where she stood exposed and vulnerable. The wolves had found her. Luna had seen wolves before, usually at a distance, usually alone or in pairs. These were different. Bigger than any she'd encountered, with shoulders that came up to a man's waist, and coats so dark, they seemed to absorb what little sunlight filtered through the overcast sky. Their leader, a massive black wolf with a white blaze across his muzzle, stood directly ahead, studying her with the patience of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. The rifle leaning against her father's headstone was her only hope, but when she reached for it, the stock cracked in her hands. The weapon had taken a fall during the burial, and now the firing mechanism hung loose, useless as a walking stick. 12 wolves, 1 woman, and 40 yards of open ground between her and the dubious safety of the cabin. She backed toward the grave, her father's final resting place now serving as her potential last stand. The wolves didn't advance, not yet, but they shifted positions with the coordinated precision of a pack that had hunted together through many winters. They were waiting for something, some signal or sign that would unleash them like a flood of teeth and fury. Luna's hand found the shovel handle, and she gripped it tight enough to make her knuckles white. It wasn't much of a weapon against creatures that could tear a full-grown elk to pieces, but it was better than facing them empty-handed. The largest wolf took a step forward, then another, its massive paws making no sound on the frozen ground. That's when the rocks began to fall. Not a landslide, not an avalanche, but a deliberate cascade of stone and debris from the cliff face that towered above the clearing. Luna looked up, squinting against the gray sky, and saw him. A figure in buckskin and fur, rappelling down the sheer rock wall with the fluid grace of someone who'd been born to the vertical world. He dropped the last 15 feet in a controlled fall, landing in a crouch between Luna and the wolf pack with barely a sound. When he straightened, She could see he was Modoc, tall and lean with black hair braided with feathers and small bones. His face was painted with red and white stripes that made him look like war itself given human form. In his hands were weapons she'd never seen before, a curved bow that seemed to be carved from a single piece of dark wood, and a quiver of arrows that hummed with barely contained energy. The wolves hadn't retreated at his arrival, but they'd shifted their stance, recognition flickering in their yellow eyes. This was no ordinary encounter between predator and prey. This was something older, more complex, a meeting between species that had shared these mountains long before white settlers had arrived with their guns and their certainty. The man spoke, but not to Luna. His words were in a language she didn't recognize, rhythmic and flowing like water over stones. The largest wolf cocked its head, listening, and Luna realized with a shock that this wasn't a rescue. This was a negotiation. "They say you smell like death," the man said without turning around, his English accented but clear. "They say you carry the scent of the recently buried, and it makes them curious about whether you belong with the living or the dead." Luna found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. "Who are you? What do you want with me?" "I am Silent Elk of the Modoc people," he replied, finally turning to face her. His eyes were dark as river stones, and they held a depth that spoke of winters survived and battles won. "As for what I want, that remains to be seen. The wolves called me here. They said there was a woman alone who might need deciding upon." The pack leader let out a low growl, not threatening but conversational, and Silent Elk nodded as if he understood every nuance of the sound. Luna felt like she was watching something from another world, a reality where the barriers between human and animal were thinner than she'd ever imagined. "Deciding upon?" Luna asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. The shovel in her hands felt more inadequate by the second, especially as she watched the easy way Silent Elk held his weapons, like they were extensions of his own body. "Whether you live or die," he said matter-of-factly. "Whether you belong to this mountain or whether the mountain belongs to you. The wolves have been watching your family for 3 seasons. They know. Your father is dead. They know you are alone. What they don't know is whether you have the strength to remain here or the wisdom to leave." Luna's temper flared, a spark of the fire that had kept her and her father alive through 3 brutal winters. "I don't need anyone's permission to live on my own land. This cabin, this clearing, everything you see belongs to me by right of blood and sweat." Silent Elk smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Rights, laws, property, these are words that mean nothing to wolves, Miss Pierce. To them, you are either strong enough to hold what you claim or weak enough to be taken from it. Today, they test what you are." The fact that he knew her name sent a chill down her spine. She'd never seen this man before, was certain of it, yet he spoke with the familiarity of someone who'd been watching her for a long time. "How do you know who I am?" "The Modoc know many things about those who share our mountains," Silent Elk replied. "We know your father traded fairly and spoke truthfully. We know you can shoot straighter than most men and track game through snow that would hide an elk's trail. We also know you buried him alone this morning, with no help and no ceremony, because there was no one else to do it." Luna felt tears threaten, but she pushed them back. Crying in front of a pack of wolves and a strange Modoc warrior wasn't going to improve her situation. "What does any of that matter to you or to them?" Silent Elk gestured toward the wolves, who had begun to spread out again, forming a wider circle that included both humans now. "It matters because strength takes many forms. The wolves respect physical power, yes, but they also understand the strength that comes from enduring loss, from continuing when it would be easier to lie down and let the mountain claim you." The largest wolf took another step forward, close enough now that Luna could see the scars that crisscrossed its muzzle and the intelligence that burned in its yellow gaze.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
It studied her with the same intensity she'd seen in men evaluating horseflesh or judging the quality of a rifle. "What do they want from me?" Luna asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, despite the fear that was eating away at her. "Composure like acid on metal. Proof," Silent Elk said simply. "Proof that you belong here. Proof that you understand what it means to survive in a place where mercy is scarce and mistakes are often fatal. Your father is dead, but the question remains whether his daughter has inherited his strength or merely his stubbornness." Luna looked around the circle of wolves, counting them again. 12. More than enough to tear her apart before Silent Elk could intervene, assuming he would even try. But there was something in their posture, in the way they held themselves, that suggested this wasn't about hunger. This was about something deeper, more primal. "And if I fail their test?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Silent Elk's expression didn't change, but his grip on his bow tightened slightly. "Then they will do what wolves do to those who don't belong. And I will do what the Modoc do when the natural order asserts itself." Luna realized that her situation had just become infinitely more complex. It wasn't just about surviving a wolf attack anymore. It was about proving herself worthy of survival to a warrior whose people had been fighting for their own survival against encroaching settlers for decades. The irony wasn't lost on her. "What kind of test?" she asked, setting the shovel aside and straightening to her full height. If she was going to face whatever came next, she'd do it standing tall, the way her father had taught her. The pack leader approached until it was close enough to touch, its massive head level with Luna's chest. Up close, she could see that its left ear was torn, probably from some long-ago battle, and that its teeth were stained yellow with age and use. When it sniffed at her clothing, she forced herself to remain perfectly still. Silent Elk spoke. Again in Modoc, a longer phrase this time, and the wolf stepped back but didn't retreat. "I have told them that you are under my protection until the test is complete," he explained. "They will honor this, but protection has limits. What happens next depends entirely on what you choose to do." Luna looked from the warrior to the wolves and back again, trying to understand the dynamics at play. She was clearly at the center of something ancient, something that existed outside the world of deeds and property lines and legal rights. "What are my choices?" "Three paths," Silent Elk said, holding up 3 fingers. "You can run. Try to reach your cabin and barricade yourself inside. The wolves will let you go, but they will remember that you chose fear over courage. You will never be safe in these mountains again." Luna nodded, understanding. Running would mark her as prey, and predators never forgot the scent of fear. The second choice? You can fight. Take up your father's rifle, broken though it may be, and face them as warriors face their enemies. If you die with honor, the Modoc will sing of your courage. If you somehow survive, the wolves will respect your strength. The broken rifle lay beside her father's grave, its cracked stock a mockery of protection. Even if it could fire, she had only 3 bullets, and 12 wolves could close the distance before she could reload. And the third choice? Silent Elk smiled again, and this time there was approval in his expression. You can trust. Put down your weapons, show the wolves that you understand they are not your enemies, but your teachers. Let them judge you, not by your fear or your fury, but by your willingness to accept their wisdom. Luna stared at him in disbelief. You want me to let a pack of wolves decide whether I live or die? To just stand here defenseless while they do whatever wolves do to test someone's worthiness? I want you to understand that sometimes the greatest strength comes from admitting that there are forces in this world greater than our ability to control them. Silent Elk replied, Your father understood this. It's why he was able to trade with the Modoc when other settlers could not. It's why he survived here when others did not. The mention of her father gave Luna pause. Thomas Pierce had indeed maintained good relations with the local tribes, something that had earned him both respect and suspicion from other settlers. She'd always attributed it to his fairness in trade, but now she wondered if there was more to it. "How well did you know my father?" she asked, buying time as much as seeking information. The wolves remained in their positions, patient as stone, but she could sense their readiness to move at a moment's notice. "Well enough to mourn his passing," Silent Elk said quietly. "Well enough to know that he would want his daughter to make her own choice about how to face what comes next. He taught you to be strong, Miss Pierce. Now you must decide what kind of strength serves you best." Luna looked down at her father's grave, at the fresh dirt that marked his final resting place. 3 years in these mountains had taught her that survival often meant making choices that civilized people would consider madness. She'd eaten raw fish when the firewood ran out, slept in trees when bears claimed their cabin for a night, and once helped her father deliver a breech foal in a blizzard that should have killed them. The largest wolf took another step closer, and Luna realized that her time for decision was running out. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, and whatever was going to happen needed to happen soon. Wolves were creatures of twilight and darkness, and she suspected their patience would end when full night fell. She looked at Silent Elk one more time, searching his face for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. What she saw was something unexpected: respect. He wasn't just offering her choices. He was offering her the chance to choose her own fate in a way that honored both her heritage and his. The wolf's yellow eyes never left hers as Luna approached, each step feeling like walking across thin ice that might shatter and plunge her into depths she couldn't imagine. The creature's breath steamed in the cold air, and she could smell the wild scent of it, musky and sharp, mixed with something that might have been recent blood. When she was close enough to touch its massive head, she stopped. "I choose trust," she said, her voice carrying across the clearing to Silent Elk. "But I need to understand what that means. What exactly are they testing me for?" Silent Elk moved closer, his moccasined feet making no sound on the frozen ground. "The wolves have watched your family since you first came to this mountain. They know that your father respected the old ways, the balance between taking and giving that keeps these highlands from becoming a wasteland. They want to know if his daughter carries the same wisdom." Luna felt the pack leader's nose touch her outstretched hand, cold and wet, followed by a careful sniff that seemed to catalog every detail of her scent. The other wolves had begun to move, not closer but in a slow circle around the clearing, their movement ritualistic rather than predatory. "My father never mentioned any arrangement with wolves," Luna said, though even as she spoke the words, she remembered strange things. Times when game had appeared near their cabin during the worst of winter, when her father had left portions of fresh kills at the edge of the clearing, claiming it was payment for safe passage. Thomas Pierce was a wise man who understood that survival in these mountains requires more than bullets and determination, Silent Elk explained. He made agreements with forces that most white settlers refused to acknowledge exist. The wolves were part of that understanding. The pack leader completed its examination of Luna's hand and stepped back, releasing a low sound that was neither growl nor whine, but something between the two. The other wolves responded immediately, their circular movements stopping as they all turned to face her directly. "What did it decide?" Luna asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. The intelligence in the creature's eyes was unsettling, as if it could see things about her that she didn't know herself. Silent Elk listened as the pack leader made several more sounds, a complex series of growls, whines, and something that sounded almost like speech. "It says you smell like your father, but also like something else. Something that doesn't belong to these mountains but isn't entirely foreign either. It wants to know what that something is." Luna frowned, trying to understand what the wolf might be detecting. She'd been born in Missouri, had lived most of her life in settled country before coming west with her father. Perhaps that was what it sensed, the lingering traces of a different kind of life. "I don't know what it's sensing," she admitted. "I've been here 3 years. This is my home now." The pack leader approached again, this time moving around her in a slow circle, never taking its eyes off her face. Luna forced herself to remain still, though every instinct screamed at her to run or fight or do something other than stand defensively, while a creature that could kill her with a single bite examined her like livestock at market. "Home is more than time and intention," Silent Elk said quietly. "Home is understanding. It's knowing that you belong to a place as much as it belongs to you. The wolves can sense when someone truly belongs and when they're merely occupying space." As the pack leader completed its circle, Luna noticed something she'd missed before. The other wolves weren't just standing in random positions. They'd arranged themselves in a pattern that corresponded to the geography around them, with some position toward the cabin, others toward the trail that led down to the valley, and still others facing the cliff from which Silent Elk had descended. "They're mapping the territory," she realized suddenly. "They're not just testing me. They're showing me something about how they see this place." Silent Elk nodded approvingly. "Now you begin to understand. To the wolves, this clearing isn't just a place where humans built a cabin. It's a crossroads, a meeting point between different types of territory. Your father understood this. He positioned his cabin to honor the natural boundaries rather than impose upon them." Luna looked at her home with new eyes, seeing how her father had built it not in the center of the clearing but slightly to one side, leaving the natural flow of the land undisturbed. The cabin's orientation faced the sunrise, but its back was to the cliff, protected but not dominating. The pack leader returned to stand directly in front of her, so close now that she could feel the heat radiating from its massive body. When it sat back on its haunches, bringing its head level with hers, Luna realized this was some kind of formal moment. "It's asking for your promise." Silent Elk translated as the wolf released another series of complex sounds. "The same promise your father made when he first came here. That you will respect the balance, that you will take only what you need and give back what you can. That you will understand yourself as part of the mountain rather than its master." Luna felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about surviving a wolf encounter anymore. This was about accepting a responsibility that would define how she lived for as long as she remained in these mountains. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked, though she suspected. She already knew the answer. "Then you leave," Silent Elk said simply. "Tonight, with whatever you can carry. The wolves will give you safe passage to the valley, but you can never return. This territory will be closed to you forever." Luna looked around the clearing one more time, taking in the cabin her father had built with his own hands, the grave where he now rested, the mountains that had become more familiar to her than any place she'd ever lived. 3 years wasn't long in the span of a lifetime, but it was long enough to grow roots. "And if I accept, then you become part of something older than deeds and property lines," Silent Elk replied. "You become part of the mountain itself, with all the responsibilities and protections that entails." The pack leader made another sound, softer this time, almost questioning. Luna realized it was waiting for her answer, had been waiting with the patience that only wild creatures possessed. Time moved differently for wolves than it did for humans. They could wait hours or days for the right moment to act, Luna thought. About her father's stories, the ones he'd told during long winter nights when the wind howled around their cabin, and the fire was the only thing standing between them and the endless cold. Stories about the early days when he'd first come to these mountains and made mistakes that had nearly cost him everything. How he'd learned to listen to the land instead of trying to impose his will upon it. "I accept," she said finally, her voice strong and clear in the gathering dusk. "I promise to respect the balance, to take only what I need, and to understand myself as part of this mountain rather than its master." The pack leader rose to its feet and stepped forward until its massive head was inches from Luna's face. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, woman and Wolf looked directly into each other's eyes. Then the creature touched its nose to her forehead, a gentle contact that felt like a blessing and a warning combined. What happened next took Luna completely by surprise. The Wolf began to glow, not with any earthly light, but with something that seemed to come from within its very bones. The glow spread to the other wolves, then to Silent Elk, and finally to the clearing itself. For a brief moment, Luna could see the mountain as the wolves saw it, a living entity with currents of energy flowing through it like blood through veins. When the light faded, the world looked different. Not changed exactly, but more real somehow. As if she'd been looking at everything through dirty glass and someone had finally cleaned it. The wolves were no longer just animals. They were guardians, protectors of something ancient and vital that most humans had forgotten ever existed. "Welcome to the true mountain," Silent Elk said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice now. "Your father would be proud." The pack leader stepped back and released a long, low howl that was answered immediately by the other 11 wolves. The sound echoed off the cliff faces and rolled down into the valley below, a declaration that carried for miles. Luna realized she was hearing her own acceptance being announced to every creature within hearing distance. As the howling faded, the wolves began to disperse, not fleeing but simply melting back into the forest from which they'd emerged. The pack leader was the last to go, pausing at the edge of the tree line to look back at Luna one final time before disappearing into the shadows. "They'll be watching," Silent Elk said as the last wolf vanished. "Not as threats, but as allies. You're under their protection now, but that protection comes with expectations. Live up to your promise, and this mountain will provide for you in ways you can't imagine. Break it, and they'll know immediately." Luna looked toward her cabin, which now seemed different somehow, more permanent, more truly home than it had ever felt before. The lamplight in the windows looked warmer, more welcoming, and she realized that for the first time since her father's death, she wasn't afraid of being alone. "Will you stay for supper?" she asked Silent Elk, surprising herself with the invitation. "It's been a long day, and I suspect you have more to tell me about these arrangements my father made." Silent Elk considered the offer, glancing toward the cliff face he'd descended earlier. "The night is young, and there are indeed things you should know before you begin your new life as a daughter of the mountain. Yes, I will stay. But first, we should tend to your father's grave properly. The wolves respect those who honor their dead." Together, they walked to the mound of fresh earth where Thomas Pierce lay buried. Silent Elk produced a small leather pouch from his belt and sprinkled something that looked like crushed herbs over the grave while speaking in Modoc. Luna didn't understand the words, but she felt their power. "What did you say?" she asked when he finished. "I asked the mountain to welcome a friend," Silent Elk replied. "And I asked your father's spirit to guide his daughter in the promises she's made today." The cabin felt different when they entered it together. Luna had lived here for 3 years, but now it seemed larger somehow, as if the walls had expanded to accommodate not just 2 people, but the weight of new understanding. Silent Elk moved through the space with respectful curiosity, examining her father's possessions with the eye of someone who had known the man personally. "He kept the old ways," Silent Elk observed, running his fingers along a series of small carved figures that Thomas had arranged on the mantelpiece. "These are protection totems. Modoc work, but adapted for a white man's understanding." Luna had always wondered about those carvings. Her father had claimed they were just decorative pieces he'd acquired in trade, but she'd noticed he was careful about their placement and became agitated if anyone moved them. "Protection from what?" "From forgetting," Silent Elk said simply. "From losing sight of the fact that this mountain has been home to many peoples over many generations. Your father understood that to truly belong here, he needed to acknowledge those who came before, Luna prepared a simple meal of venison stew and cornbread while Silent Elk tended the fire. The routine tasks felt comforting after the intensity of the afternoon, but she found herself stealing glances at her guest. In the lamplight, the war paint on his face looked less fierce and more ceremonial, and she could see that he was younger than she'd initially thought, probably not much older than her own 26 years. "How long have you been watching our family?" she asked as they sat down to eat. "Since the day you arrived," Silent Elk replied. "The Modoc Council sent scouts to observe when word reached us that Thomas Pierce had claimed land in the Sacred Valley. Most white settlers who try to establish themselves here don't last through their first winter. Your father was different," Luna thought about their early days on the mountain, the mistakes they'd made, the harsh lessons they'd learned. There had been times when survival seemed impossible, when the cold and isolation and constant struggle had nearly broken both of them. What made him different? "He listened," Silent Elk said, taking a careful bite of the stew. "Most settlers come with fixed ideas about how the land should be used, how nature should be controlled and shaped to their needs. Your father came with questions. He asked the mountain what it required of him, rather than demanding what he required of it." Luna remembered those first months, how her father had spent hours walking the boundaries of their claim, not surveying or planning but simply observing. He'd watch how water flowed during the spring melt, where animals naturally gathered, which areas remained sheltered during storms. Only after a full season of observation had he chosen the location for their cabin. The wolves helped him, she realized suddenly. That's why our cabin survived when the Henderson place was destroyed by that avalanche 2 winters ago. Father knew where to build because the wolves showed him the safe places. Silent Elk nodded. The mountain speaks to those who know how to listen. The wolves are one of its voices, but not the only one. Your father learned to hear the messages in wind patterns, in the behavior of birds, in the way certain trees grew and others didn't. As if summoned by their conversation, a sound drifted through the cabin walls. Not threatening, but definitely present. Luna recognized it as the soft padding of large paws circling the building. The wolves had returned, but their movement was protective rather than predatory. They're setting a perimeter. Silent Elk explained, noting her awareness of the sounds. Tonight, while you sleep, they'll make sure nothing harmful approaches. Consider it a wedding gift. Wedding gift? Luna asked, puzzled by the term. You're married to the mountain now, Silent Elk said with a slight smile. The bond you've accepted is deeper than any human ceremony. The wolves are celebrating your union with their territory. The concept was strange but not entirely unwelcome. Luna had always felt more at home in the wilderness than in towns, more comfortable with the rhythm of seasons than the artificial schedules of civilization. If she was truly bound to this place, perhaps that explained why leaving had never seriously crossed her mind, even during the hardest times. What exactly does this bond require of me? She asked. You mentioned responsibilities. Silent Elk set down his spoon and looked at her seriously. First, you must never take more than you need. Hunt only what you can eat. Cut only the wood you can use. Disturb only the ground that's necessary for your survival. The mountain keeps careful accounts, Luna nodded. Her father had taught her similar principles, though he'd framed them as practical conservation rather than spiritual obligation. What else? You must serve as a guardian when called upon, Silent Elk continued. There will be times when the mountain faces threats that require human intervention. You'll know when those times come, and you'll be expected to act. What kind of threats? Luna asked, though she suspected she already knew some of the answer. Mining companies had been sniffing around the area for months, and there were rumors of a railroad survey planned for the following spring. Men who see this land as nothing more than resources to be extracted, Silent Elk said grimly. Men who would strip the trees, poison the streams, and drive away everything that makes this place alive. Your father turned away 3 different mining operations. Now that responsibility falls to you. Luna thought about the visits her father had received from various businessmen over the years. Men in expensive suits who'd offered increasingly large sums for the mineral rights to their land. Thomas had always refused politely but firmly, claiming the mountain wasn't for sale at any price. Now she understood his true motivation. How did father turn them away without causing trouble? She asked. Mining companies weren't known for taking no for an answer, especially from isolated settlers who lacked legal or political connections. Silent Elk's expression grew darker. Sometimes he didn't turn them away. Sometimes they simply disappeared. The mountain has many ways of protecting itself, and not all of them are gentle. A chill ran down Luna's spine as she considered the implications. Her father had always been a peaceful man, but she was beginning to understand that peace in the wilderness sometimes required a different kind of strength than peace in civilization. Have you ever had to make men disappear? She asked quietly. Once, Silent Elk replied without elaboration. A group of surveyors last spring who refused to respect the boundaries they were shown. The mountain claimed them during a freak storm. Their bodies were never found. Luna studied his face, trying to determine if he was speaking metaphorically or literally. The calm way he discussed such matters suggested that the boundary between natural consequence and deliberate action might be thinner than she'd ever imagined. The sound of movement outside the cabin intensified, and Luna realized more creatures had joined the wolves in their patrol. She could hear the soft hoot of owls, the rustle of what might have been deer or elk, and stranger sounds that she couldn't identify. It was as if the entire mountain ecosystem had come to acknowledge her new status. Will I be able to communicate with them the way you do? She asked. In time, Silent Elk said. The gift develops gradually as your bond with the mountain deepens. Your father could understand basic wolf speech by his 2nd winter here. And by his 3rd year, he could read the messages that animals leave in their movements and behaviors. Luna remembered instances when her father had seemed to know things he shouldn't have known, like when storms were coming before the sky showed any signs, or when he'd suddenly decide to check their food stores just before a period of bad hunting. She'd attributed it to experience and intuition, but now she wondered if there had been more to it. What happened to him? She asked suddenly. Father was careful about everything, always prepared, always aware of potential dangers. How did he die so suddenly? Silent Elk was quiet for a long moment, and Luna could see him weighing how much truth she was ready to hear. Your father was old, he said finally. Not in years, but in the way that matters to the mountain. He'd carried the burden of guardianship for 3 years. And that responsibility ages a person in ways that can't be seen. You're saying the mountain killed him? Luna asked, her voice sharp with sudden anger. I'm saying the mountain called him home, Silent Elk replied gently. Thomas Pierce died peacefully in his sleep after ensuring that his daughter was prepared to take his place. The fever and delirium you witnessed were not illness but transition. He was receiving his final instructions, learning what he needed to pass on to you. Luna stared at him in shock. The things he said during those 3 days, the rambling about voices in the wind and eyes in the trees, that was real? Every word, Silent Elk confirmed. He was being taught the deep secrets of the mountain so he could prepare you for this moment. His death wasn't a tragedy, Luna. It was a graduation. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Everything she'd understood about her father's final days, everything she'd grieved over and felt guilty about, suddenly looked different. His apparent delirium had been a sacred process, and she'd been too blind to see it. Why didn't he tell me? She whispered. Why didn't he prepare me for this? Because preparation would have made the choice meaningless, Silent Elk explained. You had to face the wolves and make your decision based on your own understanding of what was right. If you'd known about the bond beforehand, your acceptance would have been calculation rather than trust. Luna rose from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness where she knew dozens of eyes were watching her cabin with protective intent. The weight of her new responsibility was beginning to settle on her shoulders, and she wondered if she was strong enough to carry it. What if I fail? She asked without turning around. What if I'm not worthy of the trust they've placed in? May, Silent Elk joined her at the window, his presence solid and reassuring. Your father had the same fears when he first accepted the bond. Every guardian does. But the mountain doesn't choose those who are already perfect. It chooses those who have the capacity to grow into what they need to become. Outside, one of the wolves appeared at the edge of the clearing, its form barely visible in the darkness. It sat watching the cabin for several minutes before disappearing back into the forest. Luna realized it had been checking on her, ensuring she was safe and settled. They really do care, she said with wonder. Your pack now, Silent Elk replied. And pack takes care of its own. As the night deepened, Silent Elk shared more details about the mountain's history, the various peoples who had served as guardians over the centuries, and the delicate balance that kept the territory safe from those who would exploit it. Luna listened with growing amazement, beginning to understand that she'd inherited not just land, but a legacy stretching back generations. There are others like me? She asked. Scattered throughout the territories, Silent Elk confirmed. Guardians chosen by different aspects of the wild. Some serve the forests, others the rivers, still others the high peaks where eagles nest. We form a network of protection across the entire region. Luna felt less alone, knowing that she wasn't the only person carrying such responsibility. Do we ever meet? Work together? When necessary, Silent Elk said. There are gatherings at certain times of the year, and we communicate through methods you'll learn as your abilities develop. But mostly, each guardian tends their own territory and trusts the others to do the same. The fire had burned low during their conversation, and Luna realized how late it had grown. Silent Elk noticed her fatigue and rose to take his leave. But she stopped him with a question that had been building in her mind all evening. Will I see you again? She asked, and was surprised by how much the answer mattered to her. Silent Elk paused at the door, his hand on the latch. The mountain brings together those who need each other, he said cryptically. If our paths are meant to cross again, they will. After he left, Luna sat alone by the dying fire, listening to the sounds of her protectors moving through the darkness outside. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly at peace. Not because her grief was gone, but because she finally understood her place in something larger than her own loss. She climbed the ladder to the cabin's small loft, where her narrow bed waited beneath the slanted roof. As she settled under her quilts, she could hear the soft sound of wolves breathing just outside the walls. They would keep watch through the night, ensuring her safety as she began her new life as a daughter of the mountain. Before sleep claimed her, Luna whispered a promise to the darkness. I won't let you down, Father. I'll be worthy of what you've given me. And somewhere in the night, whether in dream or reality, she heard Thomas Pierce's voice carried on the mountain wind. I know you will, daughter. I know you will. Luna woke before dawn to the sound of gunshots echoing across the valley. Not the careful, deliberate shots of a hunter taking game, but the rapid, aggressive firing of men who shot first and asked questions later. She rolled from her bed and grabbed her father's rifle from its place beside the window, automatically checking the action before remembering that the weapon was still broken from yesterday's burial. The wolves were no longer circling the cabin. Through her window, she could see them arranged in a defensive line at the edge of the clearing, their attention focused on something moving up the mountain trail. Whatever was coming had put every guardian creature in the area on high alert. Luna dressed quickly in her warmest clothes and stepped onto the cabin's small porch. The morning air was sharp with the promise of winter, and her breath steamed as she studied the scene below. 3 riders were making their way up the narrow trail that led to her clearing, and from their aggressive pace and the way they handled their weapons, She could tell they weren't friendly visitors. The lead rider was a large man in an expensive coat that marked him as someone from back east, probably a city dweller who'd never spent a night under the stars. Behind him rode two men who had the hard look of professional gunfighters, the kind who hired out to mining companies and railroad barons when persuasion failed to achieve their goals. Luna's new bond with the mountain immediately made itself known. She could feel the hostility radiating from the approaching men like heat from a forge, and something deeper stirred in response. The protective instincts that the wolves had awakened in her yesterday now extended to every tree, every stream, every living thing within the territory she'd sworn to guard. One of the wolves, a gray female with intelligent amber eyes, approached the porch and sat at Luna's feet. The gesture was clearly communicative, and Luna found herself understanding its meaning as clearly as if the animal had spoken. The men coming up the trail were the same ones who had been pressuring her father to sell his mineral rights, and they'd decided that his death presented an opportunity to deal with a more tractable heir. "Thank you for the warning," Luna whispered to the wolf, who acknowledged her words with a slight nod before trotting back to rejoin the defensive line. The ease of the communication surprised Luna, but she didn't have time to wonder about it. The riders would reach her clearing within minutes, and she needed to be ready. She thought about Silent Elk's words from the night before about guardians having to face threats that required human intervention. Apparently, her first test as protector of the mountain was going to come sooner than she'd expected. The lead rider spurred his horse into the clearing with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no by anyone he couldn't buy or intimidate. When he saw Luna standing on her porch, unarmed and apparently alone, his weathered face split into a predatory grin that made her skin crawl. "Miss Pierce, I presume," he called out without dismounting. "Name's Jeremiah Blackwood, representing the Colorado Mineral Development Company. I'm here to discuss a business proposition that I believe will be very much to your advantage." Luna stepped down from the porch, moving with the deliberate calm her father had taught her for dealing with dangerous men. "Mr. Blackwood, you're trespassing on private land. I'll ask you once to turn around and leave the way you came." Blackwood's grin widened, showing teeth stained yellow from tobacco. "Now, miss, that's no way to treat visitors who've ridden all this way to make you wealthy. Your father was a stubborn man, God rest his soul, but I'm hoping his daughter has more sense about business matters." The two gunmen had spread out to flank Blackwood, their hands resting casually on their weapons. Luna noticed that their horses were nervous, shifting and snorting as they sensed the presence of the wolves hidden in the tree line. The animals knew they were in hostile territory, even if their riders didn't. "My father's business decisions were sound," Luna replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "He chose not to sell, and I'm making the same choice. Now leave my land before I'm forced to make you leave." Blackwood laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the surrounding cliffs. "And how exactly do you plan to force three armed men to do anything, little girl? You're all alone up here, with no law and no neighbors to help you. Seems to me you're in no position to make threats." That's when Luna felt it, the connection that Silent Elk had told her would develop over time. It came not as words but as pure communication, a flow of information between her mind and the collective consciousness of every creature within miles. She could sense the positions of dozens of wolves, the locations of mountain lions padding silently through the trees, and the presence of a massive grizzly bear that had awakened early from its winter preparations. "You're right that I'm alone," Luna said, taking another step forward. "But this mountain isn't empty, Mr. Blackwood. You've brought guns to a place where guns are just noisemakers. The real power here doesn't come from weapons." One of the gunmen, a scar-faced man with cold eyes, shifted in his saddle and let his hand drop closer to his pistol. "Boss, maybe we should just take what we came for and go. This place gives me the creeps." Blackwood shot his employee a disgusted look. "Shut up, Carson. She's one woman with no weapon and no help. We'll take our time and do this proper. Luna felt the mountain's response to the threat building around her like a storm gathering strength. The wolves were moving closer, still hidden but ready to act on her signal. More concerning for the visitors, several mountain lions had positioned themselves in the trees above the trail, cutting off any easy retreat. "Last chance, Mr. Blackwood," Luna said, her voice carrying a new authority that seemed to come from the mountain itself. "Leave now, and you'll reach the valley safely. Stay, and I can't guarantee what happens next." Blackwood's face darkened with anger. He was clearly a man used to intimidating his way to what he wanted, and Luna's calm defiance was infuriating him. "Listen here, you little mountain witch. I've got legal papers that say this land's mineral rights belong to whoever can work them proper. Your father's dead. You've got no man to protect you. And I've got a dozen witnesses back in town who'll swear you agreed to sell before you met with an unfortunate accident." The threat was clear, and Luna felt something cold and implacable rise within her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everything her father had died protecting, everything the mountain had entrusted to her care. When she spoke again, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from the rocks and trees themselves. "You misunderstand the situation. Mr. Blackwood, I'm not some helpless woman you can threaten and intimidate. I'm the mountain's daughter now, and this territory is under my protection. You have 10 seconds to turn your horses around." Blackwood reached for his rifle, clearly intending to settle the matter with violence. But before his hand could close on the weapon, the forest erupted into motion. Wolves poured from the tree, line like gray shadows, moving with coordinated precision that spoke of intelligence far beyond mere animal cunning. The horses screamed and reared, dumping their riders to the ground in their panic to escape. Carson, the scar-faced gunman, managed to draw his pistol and fire twice before a massive gray wolf knocked him flat and stood over him with bared fangs. The other gunman had his weapon halfway clear when a mountain lion dropped from the trees above, landing squarely on his shoulders and driving him face first into the dirt. Blackwood himself found himself surrounded by 5 wolves, including the pack leader from yesterday. The massive black wolf with the white blaze studied the mining company representative with the same calculating intelligence it had shown Luna, but there was no offer of choice in its yellow gaze. Only judgment. "What in God's name?" Blackwood started to say, but his words were cut off when the pack leader stepped close enough for him to feel its breath on his face. Up close, the wolf was even more imposing than it had appeared at a distance, with shoulders that came up to Blackwood's chest and teeth that could have severed a man's arm with one bite. Luna walked calmly through the chaos, noting how the wolves moved aside to give her clear passage while maintaining their positions around. The 3 intruders. The connection between her and the mountain's guardians was strengthening by the moment, and she could feel their thoughts and intentions as clearly as her own. "Your men are alive," she told Blackwood, whose face had gone pale beneath his weathered tan. "But their weapons are gone, their horses have fled, and they're at the mercy of creatures that have no patience for men who threaten what they protect." Carson tried to move, but the wolf standing over him pressed one massive paw to his chest, pinning him to the ground with effortless strength. The gunman's eyes were wide with terror as he stared up at fangs that could have ended his life in an instant. "This is impossible," Blackwood whispered, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "Wolves don't behave this way. Animals don't. Organized like this. These aren't ordinary animals," Luna replied, feeling the truth of the words as she spoke them. "They're guardians, just as I am. They've been protecting this mountain longer than there have been men with guns to threaten it." The pack leader made a low sound that Luna understood as clearly as human speech. It was asking for permission to end the threat permanently, to ensure that these men could never return with larger forces or more dangerous weapons. The mountain's justice was swift and final, with no appeals or second chances. Luna considered the offer, feeling the righteous anger of every creature that called this territory home. These men represented everything that was wrong with the world beyond the mountains, the endless greed that would strip away beauty and wildness in pursuit of profit. It would be so easy to let the wolves dispense their own form of justice, but as she looked at Blackwood's terrified face, she remembered her father's teachings about mercy and the responsibilities that came with power. Thomas Pierce had always chosen compassion when possible, saving violence for moments when no other option remained. "No," she said quietly to the pack leader, "not this time. Let them carry a message back to those who sent them." The great wolf tilted its head, clearly questioning her decision. Luna could feel its confusion, could sense that showing mercy to invaders went against every instinct the mountain's guardians possessed. "They need to understand that this territory is protected," Luna explained, speaking to both the wolf and the terrified men. "But they also need to be able to tell others what they've seen here. Dead men can't spread warnings." Blackwood found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "What do you want, money? I can pay you 10 times what the mineral rights are worth." 20 times, Luna shook her head. "I want you to go back to whoever sent you and tell them that this mountain is off limits, forever. No mining, no logging, no surveying, no development of any kind. This is sacred ground now, and it will be defended as such." The mining company representative looked around at the circle of predators surrounding him and his men, clearly trying to process what he was experiencing. "But this is just wilderness, empty land. Think of what it could become with proper development." "It's already perfect," Luna replied firmly. "It doesn't need to become anything other than what it is. That's something you'll never understand, but you don't need to understand it too. Respect it." She gestured to the wolves, who stepped back but remained alert. "You're going to walk down this mountain, Mr. Blackwood. All 3 of you, on foot, carrying nothing but the clothes on your backs. If you move quickly and don't look back, you'll reach the valley before nightfall." Carson, still pinned beneath the gray wolf's paw, managed to gasp out a question. "What about our horses? Our gear? Your horses ran off when they sensed danger," Luna said. "If they're smart, they'll keep running until they're well clear of this territory. As for your gear, consider it payment for the damage you intended to cause." The mountain lion that had taken down the second gunman stepped aside, allowing the man to scramble to his feet. His expensive clothing was torn and dirty, and his face bore several shallow scratches from the cat's claws, but he was otherwise unharmed. Blackwood struggled to his feet, his legs shaking with reaction to his close encounter with forces beyond his understanding. "This isn't over," he said, trying to recover some of his lost authority. "I have connections, resources. I can bring men and equipment that will—" His words were cut off when the pack leader released a growl so deep and menacing that it seemed to make the very air vibrate. The sound carried clear warning. Any future threats would not be met with the same mercy being shown today. "Every man you bring will face the same welcome," Luna said calmly. "And next time, I might not be in such a forgiving mood. The mountain has ways of dealing with persistent threats that don't leave witnesses to tell tales." She thought of Silent Elk's mention of the surveying party that had disappeared in a freak storm, their bodies never found. The mountain's protection could take many forms, and not all of them were as gentle as what she was offering today. The 3 men began their long walk down the mountain trail, moving with the careful steps of men who knew they were being watched by predators. Luna could sense the wolves and mountain lions following them at a distance, ensuring they left the territory without attempting any mischief. As the intruders disappeared into the forest, Luna felt a profound shift in her relationship with the mountain. The successful defense of her territory had deepened the bond between them, strengthening her connection to every living thing within the boundaries she now protected. She could feel the approval radiating from the assembled guardians, their acceptance of her as a true daughter of the mountain. The pack leader approached her with what could only be described as pride in its yellow eyes. When it brushed against her hand with its massive head, Luna felt a rush of communication that conveyed concepts far more complex than simple approval. She was being welcomed into a brotherhood of guardians that stretched back centuries, joining the ranks of those who had chosen protection over profit. "Thank you," she whispered to the wolf, who acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod before trotting back toward the forest. One by one, the other guardians melted away into their natural habitat, leaving Luna alone in the clearing with her father's grave and her cabin. But she wasn't truly alone anymore. She could feel the presence of her protectors scattered throughout the territory, alert and ready to respond to any future threats. The mountain itself seemed more alive somehow, more aware of her presence and more responsive to her needs. As Luna walked back toward her cabin, she noticed that the broken rifle lying beside her father's grave had been replaced with a weapon she'd never seen before. It was clearly of Native American manufacture, its stock carved with symbols that seemed to shift and flow in the morning light. When she picked it up, it felt perfectly balanced in her hands, as if it had been made specifically for her. Note was tied to the trigger guard with a piece of leather cord. Luna unfolded it to find a message written in Silent Elk's careful script. "For the Mountain's daughter, a weapon worthy of her station. May it serve you as faithfully as you serve the sacred trust placed in your care." Luna examined the rifle more closely, marveling at the craftsmanship evident in every detail. The metal parts were perfectly maintained, and the carved symbols on the stock seemed to pulse with their own inner light. When she shouldered the weapon and sighted down its length, she felt a connection similar to what she experienced with the wolves. As if the rifle was an extension of her own will, she spent the rest of the morning exploring her territory with new eyes, seeing it not just as the land around her cabin, but as a sacred trust that had been placed in her care. Every tree, every stream, every boulder had become her responsibility. The weight of it was enormous, but so was the privilege. When evening came, Luna sat on her porch with the new rifle across her knees, watching the sun set behind the peaks that formed the western boundary of her domain. She could feel the presence of her guardians settling into their nighttime routines, and she knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new tests of her worthiness. But tonight, she was content to simply be present in the place that had chosen her as surely as she had chosen it. The Mountain's daughter was home, and she was ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks after the confrontation with Blackwood's men, Luna discovered that her connection to the mountain ran deeper than she'd ever imagined. It began with dreams that felt more real than waking life, visions of the territory as it had existed centuries before any human foot had touched its soil. In these dreams, she walked through pristine forests where trees grew to impossible heights and streams ran crystal clear, populated by creatures that existed nowhere in the modern world. She woke one morning to find fresh snow covering the ground, despite the fact that winter was still weeks away. The unseasonable weather should have been concerning, but Luna felt only excitement. The mountain was preparing for something, and her newly awakened senses told her that this premature snowfall was a gift rather than a threat. Silent Elk appeared at her door just after sunrise, arriving without sound or warning, as if he'd materialized from the morning mist itself. His expression was more serious than she'd seen before, and the war paint on his face had been replaced by symbols she didn't recognize. "The council has called for you," he said without preamble. "It's time for you to meet the other guardians and learn the full extent of your responsibilities." Luna invited him inside for coffee, but he shook his head. "We must leave immediately. The gathering happens only once each season, and missing it would be seen as a rejection of your bond with the mountain." She gathered her warmest clothes, and the rifle Silent Elk had left for her, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness about meeting others who shared her unusual calling. As they prepared to leave, the pack leader emerged from the forest and approached them with obvious intention. "Gray Thunder will accompany us," Silent Elk explained, using a name Luna had never heard before. "He serves as witness to your commitment and protector, should we encounter any hostile forces along the way." The journey began with a climb up the cliff face from which Silent Elk had first descended. Luna had always considered herself capable in the wilderness, but the route he led her on would have been impossible for anyone without supernatural assistance. Handholds appeared in solid rock where none had existed moments before, and narrow ledges widened just enough to support their passage. As they ascended, Luna began to understand that the mountain itself was actively helping them reach their destination. The very geography seemed to shift in their favor, creating paths where none should exist and smoothing obstacles that would normally have been impassable. The mountain recognizes its daughter, Silent Elk observed as Luna easily navigated a section of cliff that should have required advanced climbing equipment. It's eager to present you to the full council. They climbed for hours through terrain that became increasingly otherworldly. The trees grew larger and more ancient the higher they went, and Luna began to see animals that couldn't possibly exist in the Colorado wilderness. A white deer with antlers like crystalline branches watched them pass, and something that might have been a small dragon flitted between the tree branches above their heads. "Where exactly are we going?" Luna asked during a brief rest on a ledge that offered an impossible view of the entire territory spread out below them. "To the heart of the mountain," Silent Elk replied. "The place where all the territorial boundaries converge, where the Guardians have met for longer than human memory can recall." Gray Thunder, who had been ranging ahead of them on the narrow trail, suddenly stopped and released a low warning growl. Silent Elk immediately became alert, his hand moving to the weapon at his side. "What is it?" Luna whispered, though her own newly awakened senses were already providing the answer. Something was moving through the forest below them, something large and hostile that didn't belong in this sacred territory. Through the trees far below, Luna could see flashes of metal and the occasional glint of sunlight off glass. A large group of men was making its way up the mountain, following a different route, but clearly headed for the same general area. "Blackwood," Silent Elk said grimly. "He's returned with a larger force, and they're being guided by someone. Who knows these mountains?" Luna felt a surge of anger that the mining company representative had chosen to violate the clear warning he'd been given. But more than anger, she felt a deep sense of violation, as if intruders had broken into her home and threatened everything she held sacred. "How many?" she asked, checking the rifle Silent Elk had given her and finding it loaded with ammunition that seemed to glow with its own inner light. 20 men, maybe more," Silent Elk replied after studying the movement below. "They have explosives and equipment for large-scale excavation. This isn't just another attempt at intimidation. They're planning to strip mine the entire valley." Gray Thunder padded back to them with urgent intelligence, communicating through the bond Luna was still learning to interpret. The Wolf had scouted the intruder's route and discovered something that changed the entire situation. "They have a guide," Luna said, understanding the Wolf's report. "Someone who knows about the Guardian trails, who's leading them directly toward the council gathering." Silent Elk's expression darkened with an emotion Luna had never seen from him before. "Betrayal," he said quietly. "One of our own has broken faith with the mountain." The concept was so shocking that Luna could barely process it. Everything she'd learned about the bond between Guardians and their territory suggested that such betrayal would be impossible, that the very nature of the connection prevented anyone from acting against the mountain's interests. Who would do such a thing? She asked. "Someone who's forgotten that the mountain's gifts come with responsibilities," Silent Elk replied. "Someone who's been corrupted by the same greed that drives men like Blackwood." They resumed their climb with new urgency, knowing that they needed to reach the council before the intruders could disrupt the gathering. But as they ascended, Luna began to sense something wrong with the mountain itself. The helpful geography that had been assisting their passage was becoming unstable, paths appearing and disappearing without warning. "The betrayal is affecting the mountain's ability to maintain its protective barriers," Silent Elk explained, as they navigated a section of trail that kept trying to crumble beneath their feet. When a guardian turns against their trust, it weakens the entire network. They reached the heart of the mountain just as the sun reached its zenith, emerging onto a circular plateau that couldn't possibly exist according to any laws of geology. Luna understood. The space was vast, easily large enough to hold hundreds of people, yet it felt intimate and enclosed. Ancient trees formed a living amphitheater around a central clearing where other figures were already gathered. Luna counted at least 30 people arranged in a rough circle around a fire that burned without fuel or smoke. Men and women of various ages and ethnicities, all bearing the unmistakable aura of those who had bonded with wild places. She could see representatives of different tribes, lone mountain men who'd chosen solitude over civilization, and even a few women who, like herself, had inherited guardianship from family members. But something was wrong with the gathering. The participants seemed tense, divided, and Luna could feel an undercurrent of anger and suspicion that had nothing to do with the approaching threat from below. "Brothers and sisters," Silent Elk called out as they entered the circle. "I present Luna Pierce, daughter of Thomas, who has accepted the mountain's trust and proven herself worthy in combat against those who would desecrate our territories." An elderly Native American woman with silver braids and eyes like polished obsidian stepped forward. Her presence commanded immediate respect, and Luna could sense that she spoke for the entire council. "I am Running Deer, keeper of the high places," she said, her voice carrying the authority of decades spent in communion with forces beyond human understanding. "We welcome the mountain's new daughter, but these are dark times for celebration." She gestured toward a gap in the circle where one person was conspicuously absent. "Standing Bear, guardian of the eastern approaches, has broken faith with his trust. Even now he leads destroyers toward our most sacred places." Luna felt the collective shock and grief of the assembled guardians like a physical blow. The betrayal of one of their own was clearly unprecedented, a violation of bonds that everyone had believed unbreakable. "Why?" Luna asked, though she suspected the answer would be as old as humanity itself. "Gold," Running Deer replied simply. The mining company offered him more wealth than he'd ever imagined, and he forgot that some things are more valuable than precious metal. A younger man with the weathered look of a high country trapper spoke up from across the circle. "We should have seen it coming. Standing Bear's been talking for months about how the old ways don't serve the modern world, how guardians should profit from their positions instead of just protecting them. The old ways exist for good reasons," Silent Elk said firmly. "They've protected these mountains for centuries, while empires rose and fell in the valleys below." Running Deer raised her hand for silence. "Recriminations can wait. Right now we must decide how to deal with the immediate threat." 20 armed men with explosives, led by someone who knows our weaknesses. Luna studied the faces around the circle, seeing the weight of decision pressing down on each guardian. These were people who'd chosen to protect rather than exploit, to serve rather than profit. The idea of using violence against fellow humans clearly troubled them. "What are our options?" she asked. "We could abandon this gathering and disperse to our individual territories," suggested a woman whose clothing marked her as a guardian of the northern forests. "Let them find nothing but empty wilderness, and lose our most important opportunity to coordinate our defenses for the coming year," Running Deer replied. "The seasonal gatherings are crucial for maintaining the network that protects the entire region." Gray Thunder, who had been sitting quietly beside Luna, suddenly rose and trotted to the edge of the plateau. His behavior suggested that the approaching force was closer than anyone had realized. "How long do we have?" Silent Elk asked, interpreting the wolf's movements. "Less than an hour," Luna replied, her bond with Gray Thunder allowing her to understand his assessment. "They're moving faster than expected, and Standing Bear knows shortcuts that are cutting their travel time." A grim silence fell over the circle as the guardians contemplated their options. Luna could feel the weight of centuries of tradition pressing against the immediate need for decisive action. "There's another choice," she said quietly, though the words felt strange coming from someone so new to the Guardian community. "We could face them directly. Not to kill, but to demonstrate that this territory truly is protected by forces they can't understand or defeat." The suggestion caused a stir among the assembled Guardians. Several began speaking at once, debating the wisdom of revealing their true nature to outsiders. "The secrecy of our work has always been our greatest protection," Running Deer pointed out. "If word spreads that these mountains are guarded by supernatural forces, it could attract far worse threats than mining companies." "But if we don't take a stand now," Luna countered, "how many more standing bears will there be? How many Guardians will decide that betrayal is more profitable than faithfulness?" Silent Elk nodded slowly. "The mountain's daughter speaks wisdom. Sometimes the greatest protection comes not from hiding our strength, but from demonstrating it clearly enough that no one dares test it again." The debate continued for several minutes, but Luna could sense that time was running out. Through her connection to the mountain, she could feel the approaching intruders like an infection in the territory's bloodstream. Their very presence was causing damage to the delicate spiritual ecosystem that the Guardians had spent generations nurturing. "I'm going down to face them," she announced, rising from her position in the circle. "Not as part of any council decision, but as the guardian of the territory they're violating. This is my responsibility." Running Deer studied her with those obsidian eyes, and Luna felt as if the elder woman was seeing straight through to her soul. After a long moment, she nodded approvingly. "The mountain chose well when it selected Thomas Pierce's daughter," she said. "You have your father's courage and your own wisdom. But you won't face this threat alone, one by one." The other Guardians rose to join her. Not all of them, but enough to make a formidable force. Luna felt a surge of gratitude and humility as she realized that these experienced protectors were willing to follow the lead of someone who'd been a Guardian for less than a month. "We do this together," Silent Elk said, checking his weapons, and noting that several of the other Guardians carried tools that seemed to blur the line between physical and spiritual implements. "United, we're strong enough to face any threat. Divided, we're vulnerable to the same corruption that claimed Standing Bear." As they prepared to descend from the sacred plateau, Luna caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. Far below, barely visible through the trees, she could see the glint of sunlight off the barrel of a rifle. Someone in the approaching force was already in position to fire on the council gathering. "Sniper," she called out, pointing toward the threat. "They're not just here to mine. They're here to eliminate the Guardians entirely." The realization changed everything. This wasn't just about greed anymore. It was about the systematic destruction of everything the Guardians represented. Standing Bear hadn't just betrayed his trust. He'd provided intelligence that could lead to the annihilation of the entire Guardian network. "Now we know why the mountain called us all together," Running Deer said grimly. "Not for a routine gathering, but for the greatest test our people have faced in generations." Luna felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders as she realized that her first major challenge as a Guardian would determine not just the fate of her own territory, but the survival of an ancient tradition that had protected the wilderness for countless generations. The battle for the heart of the mountain was about to begin. The descent from the sacred plateau became a supernatural ballet of coordinated movement as the Guardians positioned themselves to face the greatest threat their order had encountered in living memory. Luna found herself at the center of a formation that seemed to flow like water around the mountain's natural contours, each Guardian moving with the fluid precision of someone who had merged their human consciousness with the wild intelligence of their territory. As they moved, Luna began to understand the true scope of what they were protecting. Through her enhanced connection to the mountain, she could perceive the intricate web of spiritual energy that connected every living thing within the Guardian territories. The approaching miners weren't just threatening to extract precious metals. They were preparing to sever connections that had taken centuries to establish. Silent Elk positioned himself at Luna's right side, his movements so synchronized with hers that they might have been dancing partners rehearsing a routine they'd performed together for years. "Can you feel them?" he asked quietly, referring not to the human intruders, but to the other guardians spread throughout the forest below. Luna nodded, marveling at the sensation of being part of something larger than herself. Each guardian appeared in her awareness as a distinct presence, their individual territories overlapping to create a protective network that covered hundreds of square miles. "It's like being part of a living map," she whispered. "Now you understand why Standing Bear's betrayal cuts so deep," Silent Elk replied. "When one guardian falls, it creates a gap in the protection that weakens everyone else. His knowledge of our positions and methods makes him more dangerous than any outside enemy." They reached a rocky outcropping that offered a clear view of the valley below, where Blackwood's expanded force was making its way through terrain that should have been impassable for such a large group. Luna could see that Standing Bear had indeed provided them with detailed intelligence about guardian routes and hidden passages. Through her rifle scope, Luna got her first clear look at the traitor who had once been their brother in service to the mountain. Standing Bear was a man in his 40s with the weathered features of someone who'd spent decades in the wilderness. But there was something wrong with his appearance. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his movements lacked the fluid grace that marked all true guardians. "The mountain has withdrawn its favor from him," Running Deer observed, having approached their position with the silent step of someone who'd learned to move like the wind itself. "He's already paying the price for his betrayal, though he may not yet realize it." Luna studied the corruption that was visibly consuming Standing Bear's connection to the natural world. His betrayal wasn't just a matter of broken trust. It was literally killing the part of him that had made him a guardian in the first place. Below them, Blackwood's force had stopped to set up what appeared to be a base camp. Luna counted 22 men, most of them heavily armed mercenaries who carried themselves with the confidence of soldiers, accustomed to getting their way through superior firepower. But there was something else moving among them, something that made her enhanced senses recoil with instinctive revulsion. "What is that?" she asked, pointing toward a figure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a zone of unnatural darkness in the bright afternoon sun. Running Deer's expression grew grave. "A soul eater," she said quietly. "Standing Bears. Corruption has attracted something from the dark places beyond the mountains. His betrayal has opened a doorway that should have remained sealed." The revelation added a new dimension of horror to their situation. Luna was beginning to understand that the Guardian Network existed not just to protect wilderness areas from human exploitation, but to maintain barriers against forces that posed threats to the entire natural order. "How do we fight something like that?" Luna asked, though her rifle felt inadequate against an enemy that existed partially outside the physical world. "With unity," Silent Elk replied. "The Soul Eater feeds on division and corruption. As long as we remain true to our bonds with the mountain, it cannot touch us directly." A sound echoed up from the valley below, the distinctive crack of explosives being detonated against stone. Blackwood's men had begun their assault on the mountain itself, using dynamite to clear a path toward the sacred places that only guardians were supposed to know. Luna felt the mountain's pain like a physical blow to her chest. Each explosion sent shockwaves through the spiritual network that connected all living things in the territory, disrupting patterns of energy that had taken decades to establish. "They're not just mining," she realized with growing horror. "They're trying to break the mountain spirit entirely." Running Deer nodded grimly. "Standing Bear has told them about the connection between the Guardians and their territories. They believe that if they can cause enough damage to the sacred places, they can sever our bonds and leave us powerless to stop them." Another series of explosions rocked the mountainside, and Luna felt several of the Guardian connections flicker and weaken. The systematic destruction was working. slowly but steadily eroding the network that had protected these lands for generations. "We have to stop them now," Luna declared, rising from her concealed position despite the danger of being spotted by the snipers below. "Every moment we delay gives them more time to damage something that can never be repaired." Silent Elk caught her arm before she could begin her descent. "Wait," he said urgently. "Do you feel that?" Luna paused, extending her senses toward the territory below. At first, she detected only the continued violation of the mountain's sacred places. But then she felt it too, a stirring in the deep places that spoke of awakening power. "The mountain is responding," she breathed, understanding flooding through her enhanced awareness. "All this damage, all this pain, it's not just making the mountain weaker. It's making it angry." The truth of her words became apparent as the ground beneath Blackwood's camp began to tremble. Not with the artificial shaking of human explosives, but with the deep, organic movement of a living system pushed beyond its limits of tolerance. Trees began to move without any wind to stir them. Streams changed course, flowing uphill when necessary to avoid the areas where the miners had established their positions. Most unsettling of all, the very rocks began to shift, creating new passages while sealing others. "The mountain is isolating them," Running Deer observed with satisfaction, "cutting them off from their escape routes while channeling them toward a place where we can deal with them on our terms." Luna watched in amazement as the landscape itself became an active participant in the defense of the sacred territory. This was Guardian work on a scale she'd never imagined possible, with the mountain itself serving as the ultimate protector of its own sanctity. But the display of natural power seemed to have an effect on Standing Bear. Through her scope, Luna could see him arguing with Blackwood, gesturing frantically toward the changing landscape around them. Whatever corruption had claimed him, he still retained enough connection to the mountain to recognize the danger they were all in. "He's trying to get them to retreat," Silent Elk observed. "Even corrupted, he doesn't want to be responsible for their deaths." "Too late for second thoughts," Running Deer said coldly. "The mountain has made its judgment." The soul leader that had been lurking among Blackwood's men suddenly became more active, its form solidifying as it fed on the fear and confusion spreading through the group. Luna could see it moving from person to person, leaving each one slightly diminished, drained of something essential to their humanity. "It's preparing for a feeding frenzy," Silent Elk said urgently. "If we don't act soon, it will consume enough life force to become powerful enough to threaten the entire Guardian network." Luna made her decision. Rising to her full height, she stepped into clear view of the camp below and raised her rifle. But instead of firing at the human intruders, she aimed at the soul eater itself. Her first shot passed harmlessly through the creature's incorporeal form, but the bullet carried more than just physical force. Charged with the mountain's own protective energy, it disrupted the soul eater's feeding pattern and forced it to solidify into a more vulnerable form. The creature turned toward her with eyes like burning coals, its attention drawn by the spiritual power behind her attack. For a moment, Luna felt the full weight of its malevolent intelligence pressing against her consciousness, trying to find cracks in her connection to the mountain. But her bond with the territory held firm, reinforced by the presence of the other guardians and the mountain's own protective embrace. The soul eater's psychic assault broke against her defenses like waves against a cliff face. "Now!" Running Deer shouted, and the forest erupted into coordinated action. The guardians revealed themselves from a dozen concealed positions, each one carrying weapons that blazed with supernatural fire. But more impressive than their individual efforts was the response of the mountain's own creatures. Wolves poured from the trees in numbers that defied rational explanation, followed by mountain lions, bears, and species that Luna was certain didn't exist in any natural history textbook. The battle that followed transcended anything that could be called conventional warfare. It was a clash between two different philosophies of existence, between those who sought to exploit the natural world and those who had dedicated their lives to protecting it. Blackwood's mercenaries opened fire with automatic weapons, but their bullets seemed to lose coherence in the strange atmosphere that surrounded the mountain. Some shots simply disappeared, while others ricocheted in impossible directions or transformed into harmless flowers before reaching their targets. The Soul Eater, now forced into physical form by Luna's spiritually charged attack, found itself facing opponents it couldn't simply drain of life force. The Guardian's weapons burned it wherever they struck, each hit diminishing its power and forcing it back toward the dark realm from which it had emerged. Standing Bear, seeing the supernatural forces arrayed against his former allies, tried desperately to reach Blackwood and convince him to order a retreat. But the mining company representative was beyond reason, his greed having transformed into a fanatical determination to claim the mountain's treasures regardless of the cost. "You promised me control," Blackwood screamed at Standing Bear while firing wildly at shapes that moved too quickly for his eyes to track. "You said they were just primitives with old superstitions. I was wrong." Standing Bear shouted back, his voice carrying the anguish of a man watching his choices destroy everything he'd once held sacred. "This place is protected by powers I never fully understood." Luna found herself moving through the chaos with supernatural grace, her rifle seeming to fire itself at targets her conscious mind hadn't even identified. Each shot found its mark with impossible accuracy, not killing but disabling, removing weapons from hands and destroying equipment that posed the greatest threat to the mountain. The battle reached its climax when the Soul Eater, desperate to escape back to its own realm, attempted to possess Standing Bear and use his residual connection to the Guardian network as a pathway to safety. But the traitor's corruption had severed those very connections, leaving him as vulnerable to the creature's hunger as any ordinary human. Luna watched in horror as Standing Bear aged decades in seconds, his life force being consumed by the entity he'd helped bring into their sacred territory. His screams echoed off the mountainsides as he paid the ultimate price for his betrayal. But his sacrifice wasn't entirely in vain. The Soul Eater's feeding frenzy left it temporarily solid and vulnerable, and Running Deer seized the opportunity to strike the final blow. Her weapon, a staff topped with a crystal that seemed to contain captured starlight, pierced the creature's core and banished it back to whatever dark realm had spawned it. With their supernatural ally destroyed and their guide dead, Blackwood's remaining men finally understood the true nature of what they were facing. Those who could still move began a panicked retreat down the mountain, abandoning their equipment and explosives in their haste to escape. Blackwood himself proved more stubborn, continuing to fire at the Guardians even as his mercenaries fled. Around him, "This is my mountain," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I have legal claim to every inch of it." Luna approached him calmly, her rifle lowered but ready. "Your papers mean nothing here," she said quietly. "This territory belongs to itself, and it chooses who may stay and who must go." The mountain seemed to agree with her assessment. The ground beneath Blackwood's feet began to sink, not catastrophically but steadily, carrying him down toward a natural cave system that would deposit him, unharmed but thoroughly humbled, at the base of the mountain dozens of miles away. As the mining company representative disappeared into the earth, still clutching his useless legal documents, Luna felt the mountain's satisfaction washing over her like warm sunlight. The threat had been neutralized, the Guardian network had been preserved, and the ancient balance between human ambition and natural wisdom had been maintained. The other Guardians began to emerge from their positions, and Luna was amazed to see that none of them had been seriously injured despite the intensity of the battle. The mountain's protection had extended to all those who served its interests, turning aside bullets and shielding them from harm. "It's finished," Running Deer announced, surveying the abandoned equipment and scattered supplies that marked the site of Blackwood's failed invasion. "The immediate threat has ended," but Luna knew that this victory, significant as it was, represented only one battle in a longer war. There will be others, she said, voicing what everyone was thinking. Other companies, other men who think. They can take what doesn't belong to them. Yes, Silent Elk agreed. But now they'll face a guardian network that has been tested in battle and proven worthy of the mountain's full support. Word of what happened here will spread, and it will make others think twice before challenging territories under our protection. As the Guardians began the process of cleaning up the damage and restoring the sacred places that had been violated, Luna felt a profound sense of completion. Her transformation from isolated settler to mountain guardian was complete, and she now understood the true scope of the responsibility she'd accepted. The mountain was safe. The Guardian network was stronger than ever, and Luna Pierce had found her true calling as protector of one of the world's last truly wild places. The wolves howled their approval from the surrounding peaks, and the sound carried a promise that echoed through every stone and stream in the territory. This land would remain free, wild, and protected for as long as there were guardians willing to stand against those who would destroy it for profit. And Luna Pierce, daughter of the mountain, would be standing watch. 5 years had passed since the battle that tested the Guardian network and proven the mountain's power to those who would challenge it. Luna Pierce stood on the same rocky outcropping where she'd first taken aim at the Soul Eater, but the woman who gazed out over the protected territory bore little resemblance to the grieving daughter, who had buried her father in frozen ground half a decade earlier. Her hair, once the color of autumn wheat, now carried streaks of silver that caught the morning light like threads of starshine. The change wasn't from age, but from her deepening connection to the mountain's ancient wisdom. Her eyes held depths that spoke of knowledge gained through communion with forces far older than human civilization. The territory itself had transformed as well. Where Blackwood's explosives had scarred the mountainside, new growth had emerged stronger and more vibrant than what had been destroyed. The mountain's healing process had left the sacred places more beautiful than ever, as if the violation had awakened dormant powers that now infused every stone and stream with protective energy. Gray Thunder, now grizzled with age but still possessing the regal bearing of a pack leader, padded up to join Luna at her morning vigil. The Great Wolf had become more than just an ally over the years. He was her closest companion and most trusted advisor in matters that required understanding the mountain's deeper intentions. The cabin below had been expanded over the years, not through her own efforts, but through the mountain's mysterious ability to provide what its guardians needed. Additional rooms had simply appeared during the long winters, growing from the original structure like branches from a tree. Visitors often remarked on the impossible architecture, but Luna had long since stopped trying to explain the mountain's gifts to those who lacked the ability to perceive them. At the cabin, she found Silent Elk waiting on the porch with a woman in practical frontier clothing. Luna's enhanced senses detected the unmistakable aura of someone who had bonded with wild places. "Luna," Silent Elk called out as she approached. "I'd like you to meet Catherine Redmond, guardian of the Guardian of the Kadwa Cascade territories in the Oregon country." Luna welcomed the visitor with mountain hospitality, but she could sense underlying tension. This wasn't a social call. Catherine had traveled hundreds of miles to discuss matters of grave importance to their entire network. The federal government has begun a systematic campaign to map all remaining wilderness areas, Catherine explained once they were seated around Luna's table. "They claim it's for scientific purposes, but our sources suggest they're preparing for coordinated assaults on Guardian territories." Luna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "They've learned from Blackwood's failure. Instead of attacking us one at a time, they're planning to overwhelm our entire network." Silent Elk nodded grimly. "A government delegation is arriving today. They'll offer you legal recognition as territorial administrator, complete with federal protection and substantial compensation." Luna immediately understood the trap. In exchange for detailed maps, resource surveys, and access rights. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. Through the window, Luna could see riders led by a man in an expensive suit who carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way through legal maneuvering rather than physical force. Gray Thunder emerged from the forest, positioning himself where the visitors could see him clearly. The message was unmistakable. This territory was protected by forces that wouldn't be impressed by government credentials. "Miss Pierce," the lead rider called out, removing his hat nervously. "I'm Marcus Whitfield, Special Territorial Administrator for the Department of the Interior. I'm authorized to offer you a position as Federal Territorial Administrator, with full legal authority over this region and an annual salary that would make you one of the wealthiest women in Colorado." He spread official documents across a portable table. "In return, we ask only for your cooperation in conducting a comprehensive survey of the area's natural resources." Luna examined the papers without touching them. "And what happens to the territory's current inhabitants?" "The wildlife would be protected under federal conservation laws," Whitfield assured her. "Any native populations would be relocated to appropriate reservations." Silent Elk's expression darkened at the casual mention of forced relocation. The government's offer wasn't just a betrayal of the mountain's trust. It was a continuation of policies that had been destroying indigenous peoples and sacred places for generations. "You misunderstand the situation, Mr. Whitfield," Luna said calmly. "This territory doesn't belong to me. I belong to it. I'm not its owner, but its protector, and that's not a role I can transfer to your government." Whitfield's professional smile became strained. "Miss Pierce, surely you can see the benefits of federal protection. Your current situation is precarious. A single bad winter, a forest fire, a mining claim, and you could lose everything." Luna felt the mountain's amusement at the threat, communicated through subtle vibrations in the stone beneath her feet. "Mr. Whitfield, this mountain has been protecting itself and those who serve it for far longer than your government has existed." One of his surveyors began setting up measuring equipment near the tree line. The moment his instruments touched the ground, every bird in the forest fell silent. Gray Thunder rose and released a howl that echoed with unnatural resonance, answered by dozens of other wolves creating a symphony of warning. "Perhaps your surveyor should relocate," Silent Elk suggested mildly. "The local wildlife objects to unauthorized scientific activities." Whitfield gestured sharply to his subordinate, who quickly packed up and retreated. "Miss Pierce, I'm offering you a solution that benefits everyone. Surely you don't want to remain isolated forever, cut off from civilization and its opportunities." Luna considered his words, thinking of how her life had been enriched by her connection to the mountain and its guardians. "Mr. Whitfield, I've found more civilization in one honest conversation with a wolf than in all the legal documents your government has ever produced." "I'll have to decline." The rejection clearly wasn't what he'd expected. "I should mention that your cooperation would be greatly appreciated, but your opposition could be seen as obstructing legitimate federal authority." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Luna felt the mountain's response building beneath her feet, a slow-growing tremor that spoke of power beyond anything the federal government could bring to bear. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Whitfield?" she asked quietly. "I'm simply explaining reality," he replied, though his nervous glances toward Gray Thunder suggested he was beginning to understand that reality in this territory operated according to different rules. A golden eagle swept down from the peaks above, circling the delegation with obvious territorial intent. Whitfield's composure finally cracked as he realized he was facing forces beyond his experience. "This conversation isn't over, Miss Pierce. The federal government has resources and legal authority that extend far beyond these mountains. And the mountains have resources that extend far beyond your government's comprehension," Luna replied. "I suggest you remember that when deciding how to proceed, the delegation departed with considerably less confidence than they displayed upon arrival." Luna watched them disappear, knowing this encounter represented only the opening move in a larger conflict that would test the Guardian Network's ability to protect their territories. After Catherine departed to carry word to other Guardians, Luna climbed to her favorite overlook where Grey Thunder waited for their evening vigil. The territory spread below them like a living map, every stream and meadow pulsing with energy that connected all things within the mountain's embrace. As the first stars appeared, Luna felt the presence of other Guardians scattered across the continent, each standing watch over their own sacred territory. Together, they formed a network of protection that spanned from Arctic tundra to desert southwest, united in their commitment to preserving wild places that still remembered how the world was meant to be. The battle for the mountain's freedom was far from over, but Luna Pierce, daughter of the peaks, guardian of the sacred places, stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The wolves sang their approval from every ridge and valley, their song carrying a promise that would echo through generations. The wild places would endure, protected by those who understood that some things were too precious to be bought, too sacred to be sold, and too important to be surrendered to those who saw only profit, where others saw the face of the divine.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.